You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means we are back once again with the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we go a little bit farther afield beyond our traditional areas of your VIX and your SPY and your Apple and your Tesla options. See what's going on in maybe some Bitcoin and perhaps some ETH. And who knows, perhaps if we're feeling adventurous, maybe a little bit of Solana and beyond. Of course, my name, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-scintillating network upon which so many of you are binging these days. August, even hotter than July, which was even hotter than June, all record months in the 15-plus year history of the network. Glad to see so many of you are enjoying the content. Remember, if you like what you hear, especially on a show like the Crypto Rundown, one of the more recent additions to the network, then keep rating and reviewing. Really does help the new folks discover the content and indeed the network. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond, join us for our great pro and Q&A sessions every Tuesday. And of course, Options Oddities at the end of the week to wrap up your week with some exclusive content, as well as live access to this and everything else we do throughout the week, as well as pro giveaways and a whole bunch more. TheOptionsInsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more. Let's see who's joining us today on the old program. Pleased to be joined once again by our old friend, Mr. Greg Magadini, the co-founder and CEO over there at Genesis Volatility, a.k.a. GVol. Mr. Greg, welcome back to the show, sir. It has been too long.
It has been a long time. Very happy to be here. Thanks, Mark.
In fact, my producers tell me you haven't been on since April 4th. That's an eternity in crypto, sir. So catch us up. What have you been doing? What's been lighting up your tape in the world of crypto since the last time we chatted, sir?
Yeah, well, we've got a lot of exciting new things going on. We expanded our team. We have Ewan Sinclair, which is a mutual friend of ours. You and I, Mark.
Can't stand that guy. What are you doing working with that guy? I didn't know he was even involved in crypto. How did he get on board?
Yeah, so he's actually an advisor. He's spending a lot of time chatting with us, sharing ideas, and we're building a lot of tools around some of his insights and ideas. We've created some proprietary direction tools. So we look at trade aggressors compared to the order book right before and right after the trade. And now we're able to create some really accurate gamma profiles from where market makers on Deribit are standing and how they're positioned in the market. So that's been really exciting. we're thrilled to kind of keep building out some of these like deep proprietary insights. We've also got some curve fitting going on, so that's really exciting. And right now, kind of just in general, as the overall space grows, we're seeing new exchanges come on, such as Bybit that just launched some USDC denominated options. So that'll be something that's really exciting. And so we're just seeing continued growth in this space. So it's great.
All right, let's keep it rolling then, right on into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the program where we break down all the action in the world's leading digital asset. Of course, we're talking about the big dog, which is Bitcoin, a little bit smaller, or a lot smaller, really, than it was this time last show. No, last show, we were just north of 22,000. Maybe it seemed like perhaps that worm was turning a little bit. The bulls out there had carried us back north of that precarious 20K level, and perhaps that was behind us for a little bit. We'll fast forward a week, and the answer is no. We've seen, of course, a lot of tumult across the broad equity markets, and we know whenever there's red on the screen in the broad equity space, that tends to drag Bitcoin right down along with it. In fact, coming into showtime right now, we were just barely north of the 19K level, 19,052. So a full 3,250 handles away from where we were this time last week. That's a pretty big move. And of course, we dipped even lower in between now and our last show. In fact, the low came earlier this morning. We got to the 18,302 this morning. So things were looking pretty dire before we have rebounded a bit. At least so far, things seem to have stabilized. We shall see. We're in kind of that whipsaw mode in the broad equity market, and we're in whipsaw mode in the crypto space as well. Everyone's waiting with bated breath to see what the Fed will be up to this week and what trajectory that will set for the markets for the foreseeable future. So let's start there, Mr. Greg. Like I said, it's been a while since you've joined us. Obviously, a lot of price action in the big dog, which is Bitcoin this week, most of it to the red. What's been lighting up your tape out there in the world of Bitcoin this week, sir?
Yeah, so I actually have kind of a lot of thoughts on this. I'm really seeing crypto assets right now trading in line with sort of risk assets. And I think this macro picture with, the inflation that we have going on right now, and kind of the next rate decision that we're having coming up pretty soon here, is going to be really bearish for risk assets and crypto in particular. So last week we had the CPI number. There's a little bit of this hope that CPI would be more transitory instead of structural. And so we actually saw the crypto vol space, traders position themselves long in Bitcoin calls, and we had pretty much 7-day Bitcoin skew go positive for essentially the first time this year, or first time since February, call it. So really positioned for a weak CPI number that would boost risk assets and Bitcoin in particular. We didn't get that. And now everything's flipped back into this bearish territory. 20K level, which is, kind of a significant level that a lot of traders are looking at, unable to hold. And now we're going into FOMC where, we're pricing in potentially a 1% rate hike. I just think that there's probably a lot more downside to come. Overall, the vol surface is back into sort of negative risk reversal skew, meaning that the puts are more expensive than the calls, but not by like a outsized margin, kind of where we've been in line since the past couple months and over summer. So everyone's kind of pricing things as usual with a slight bearish tilt. We'll see how this next FOMC rate decision changes things.
It's funny you mentioned that struggle to get positive on the skew. That's something we've been talking about here on the show for a while as well. We're going to get there, and it was very short-lived. By the way, Greg, I'm going to fire up this platform called GVol next. Are you familiar with that platform, sir?
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it. I hear good things. I'm rooting for them. A little engine that could out there. Of course, listeners, if you want to check out these numbers for yourselves, gvol.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. If you ran it, you would see for yourself right now coming into showtime. In spite of that little bit of action we've seen and that range we've seen out there in Bitcoin, we are seeing Bitcoin vol continuing to trend a little bit lower. When we kicked off the shows, just ticked right below 70. It was about a 69.5. It's down from about a 74 where it was this time last week. So again, we have some movement out there, but Bitcoin vol, we've said it before, it's kind of like precious metals vol in a lot of ways, where it can spike pretty aggressively. And then if it's not enough movement, not enough action to maintain it, it can come in just as precipitously. So we're seeing it continue to come in. We'll see if we start trending into some more aggressive dark side territory where, folks start to get a little bit nervous. That might juice up a little bit of that volatility out there again. If we go out to our friend, Mr. Simon Ho of T3 Index fame, he also runs his BitVol, which is his rolling 30-day Bitcoin VIX. We're seeing the same movement out there as well. Coming into this show is a 71.5, and on our last show is a 77.3. So vol coming in kind of across the board out there. Getting out to skew, which Greg was just talking about. On our last show, we were pretty much flat. We were pretty much even. That meant there was no bid, no premium in either direction to the calls or the puts. So the whole market was kind of holding his breath and trying to figure out what's coming next. There was no premium either way. Everyone was kind of shrugging their shoulders. As Greg mentioned, now we are back to the decidedly negative side of the board, which of course means folks are looking perhaps at a little bit more downside in the near future. But again, not decidedly negative. We're not pushing a negative 30 like we got to very briefly in some of the aggressive sell-offs earlier this year. About a little over -4, about a -4.3. So negative, but nothing extremely alarming at this point out here. And that's kind of borne out by our friend Simon's bit skew number as well, which is kind of unched on the week. It was about a 95.5 last week and a whopping 95.6 out there. So not a huge evolution out there. You can say the same for the open interest in Bitcoin options over there on Deribit. Not a huge evolution right now as well. It's still calls leading the dance at roughly 2-1, a little bit less now. 155,000 contracts open on the call front. That's up, about 3,000, so not a huge change there. The puts, 84,000, so those are starting to tick up a little bit, hence the little bit less 2-1 ratio of calls over puts right now. So they're up about 7,000 contracts on the put front out there. And let's get out some of the size strikes and see where you folks are lining up right now. And again, not a huge evolution here either this week. Let's break down the top 5 positions and see what's open out there for size on the Bitcoin options. Number 5, listeners, it is the 24,000 strike. It's got 10,300 contracts open. That's up a whopping 400 this week, so not a huge evolution there. Number 4, we have the 45,000 strikes. Now we're jumping all the way up to 45,000. That's got 10,500 contracts open. That's about unched from where it was this time last week, so no change there. Number 3, we have the 40,000 strike. That has 11,500 contracts open. It's up, again, a whopping 200, so no big evolution there. Number 2, back down the strike list to the 20,000 strike. That has 12,500 contracts open. That's up about 1,500 from this time last week. And holding out number 1 yet again this week, the 25,000 strike with a pretty modest 14,600 contracts open. It's up about 300. It's not a huge evolution out there on the open interest front. Greg, anything catching your eye out there in the realm of Bitcoin options, OI?
So the way that I'm kind of seeing it right now is, especially if I'm looking at the gamma profile, a lot of this open interest is going to be market makers that are short gamma, sort of right around these prices, call it 15 to 23. So that's kind of interesting to see that, especially when we compare it to, say, like Ethereum, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later in the show with the ETH 2.0 merge. We had a lot of negative gamma in the dealers as well going into that scenario. So there's a bit of a premium if I look at the variance risk premium of realized vol to implied vol, and traders are still just kind of getting long that, and then market makers are short that premium. So that's, to me, that's kind of interesting. There's still kind of this positioning out in the market where people are expecting something to happen, and we just kind of haven't really gotten it to the extent that it's being priced in yet.
Still waiting for that other shoe to drop. You can say that in a lot of markets right now. Speaking of markets and how much volume we're seeing out there, not a ton of paper on the tape since our last show, listeners. The busiest day was today, obviously, right now. We're seeing about 27,000 contracts on the tape so far. Obviously, the day not done, so can get a little higher. That's obviously a pretty far cry from some of the recent weeks where we were pushing 40,000 contracts out there on Deribit. So nothing there. But, of course, if you go back to the quiet days of July, then, you're talking about 10,000 contracts more than that. So it depends your frame of reference out there. But decent paper on the tape. And, again, we continue dipping back below 19,000. Again, I expect that number to increase. Let's see what's going on out there on the CME Bitcoin front, and some paper, not a heck of a lot out there on the big options, which are still too much for most people to bite off outside of the big funds out there. Again, these are 5x multiplier contract listeners. We saw nearly 400 trading last week, and so far today, a pretty decently active day. Nearly 200 contracts on the tape today. So that's used to be a week's worth of volume out there. So perhaps a sign that things are trending in the right direction. The micro options also kind of struggling to get out of the gate. They had a little bit of paper last week, about 3,000, about 3,100 contracts on the tape last week. So far today, a whopping 4 on the micro Bitcoin front. So not a heck of a lot of paper out there, listeners. As we keep on rolling now, it is time to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we explore everything going on outside of the big dog, which is Bitcoin, except for right now, we break down things from an overall market cap perspective. Let's break down the top 10 digital assets out there from a market cap perspective. Once again, Dogecoin managing to sneak into the top 10 there at 7.6 billion worth of market cap. Number 9, our old friend Solana, hanging out at about 11.3 billion. Number 8, Cardano, 15.3 billion. Number 7, XRP, 18.5 billion. Seems like maybe we will get to some sort of resolution sometime in the near future for everything XRP and Ripple, something like the SEC and Ripple both calling for the judge to finally make a decision. So I guess maybe, who knows, maybe we shall find out whether we can eventually trade this again or not. 18.5 billion for XRP. Number 6, Binance USD, 20.5 billion. Then we jump up again. Always a huge chasm between 6 and 5. Number 5, BNB, 42.8 billion worth of market cap. Number 4, USD coin, 50 billion, pretty much exactly. Tether, 67, almost 68 billion. Numero due, it's ETH back down to 162 billion. And number 1, once again, looking kind of slight, it is Bitcoin, 363 billion. Again, you add up ETH and Bitcoin right now, and they are kind of a pale shadow of where just either one of them were not too long ago. So intriguing stuff. Speaking of downside, we have seen a lot of ETH downside since our last show as well. We were at 1722 on our last show a week ago. Coming into this week's show, 1333. So you're down almost 390 handle, 388 from our show last week. And Greg, you mentioned there might have been a little bit of a headline, a little bit of a development out there in the world of ETH over the course of the past week. So what's been lighting up your tape in the world of ETH, sir, in a pretty, shall we say, interesting week?
Yeah, super interesting. And I think the most interesting aspect was the non-event of this event. So for those who are kind of new to Ethereum or new to crypto, for the longest time, we heard about the plans of Ethereum to move from a proof of work consensus mechanism to a proof of stake consensus mechanism. And so we've had this event, this transition finally happen. And the way that the options market was pricing this event was almost like an earnings event in equities, where there should be some announcement release and the market will move off that announcement, just like we see in earnings. But the interesting thing with Ethereum is that everyone was really aware of sort of this transition. Seems like in the spot market, it was well priced in. And so what happened is we saw the vol surface, pretty much realized vol was, call it 83, 7-day realized was about 83 going into the event. And peak implied vol for 7-day options hit 140 right into the sort of the transition, the block height where the transition happens. And so we actually saw a huge variance premium of nearly 60 implied vol points for 7-day options. And then nothing happened. Like spot prices almost didn't move. Later, spot prices got dragged down with the rest of the risk asset complex. But on the announcement itself, spot prices didn't move. And the huge backwardation that we saw in the term structure got slammed lower, and vol came down a lot and basically went into a small contango. And so this was a huge vol selling bonanza for everyone who sold vol. It was a great opportunity to make some solid money. And that's where I really think that crypto vol is interesting. We have events, because crypto is so new and crypto vol is so new, vol events haven't really been figured out yet. So the market wasn't apathetic. The market was willing to price this in. So they're paying attention. People are paying attention into how this might affect options, but they sort of, quote unquote, got it wrong, so to speak. And so it just shows that like people are paying attention. They're trying to price these things out, but it hasn't been figured out to the same extent that, say, equities has been figured out. So this is where I think there's a lot of opportunity. And so anyone who's paying attention and following these things closely, there's definitely some money to be made out there.
I'm glad you called it a non-event, because that was my takeaway as well. Everyone was bracing for something, right? Oh, here we go. This is it. This is the day everyone's been talking about and waiting for. And you're right. It was kind of a bit of a non-event. A good example why, even if you're not a hardcore crypto person, it's still worth it to pay attention to these markets, because there are opportunities out there developing if you are savvy enough to take advantage of them. Let's see what kind of opportunities are shaping up right now. Let's get out to the vol side first. Like we mentioned, there was a bit of a vol crush. Vol continuing to come back in. On our last show last week, we got up to north of triple digits, about a 104 on our last show. As we kick off the show today, we're at about a 90, so down about 14 points. So that's a big move on the vol front. Skew-wise, things are, again, looking pretty decidedly negative. We were almost a -2 on our last show, about -1.7, and coming into today's show, a -5.2. So, again, not entirely surprising with both Bitcoin and ETH swinging to the dark side pretty aggressively since our last show, that we see a negative skew starting to rear its ugly head again out there. The OI has been fascinating to watch, where it has been north of 4-to-1 calls over puts out there in ETH for some time. It's still hanging out at pretty darn close to that level. We're closing in on 4 million calls open right now, 3.9 million contracts on the call front. That's up a whopping 400,000 from this time last week. The puts closing in on 1,926,000. That's up about 51,000 this week. So once again, we are still north of 4-to-1 calls over puts, which is kind of fascinating. Greg, we've been watching that build up for a while, this intense call open interest for some time, especially around the 3,000 strike, in areas like Dees and others. Is it something you've been watching as well, and just how aggressive it's getting? 4-to-1 calls over puts pretty much every week out here in ETH, and it has been for months, Greg.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and especially if I kind of lay in another context when I'm looking at Ethereum open interest, is total notional open interest of Ethereum versus notional open interest of Bitcoin. So forever, the crypto vol market is a Bitcoin vol market. And within, call it the past 6 weeks, we've actually seen a flippening in ETH notional open interest versus Bitcoin notional open interest on Deribit. So again, Deribit's kind of the only market that matters. And what we're seeing is that open interest is now maximum in Ethereum. So the crypto vol market is now an Ethereum vol market. So that's super exciting. And then combine that with the fact that the open interest on the call side is so much higher than the put side. I mean, there's definitely some interesting positioning going on right now. We know that a lot of the flow in the options market, especially talking to the exchanges themselves directly and seeing our customer base, that we're seeing a lot of institutional players starting to partake in crypto vol. So it really seems like the institutional appetite is trading around Ethereum vol, and then combine that with Ethereum is now going to be a yielding asset. It looks pretty good. I mean, I still think the macro picture is pretty bearish, and at the end of the day, like, interest rates are the input to everything. But if I'm going to get long cryptos, that's an interesting context around bullishness for Ethereum.
We said it was a non-event, but interestingly enough, it did move some numbers, Greg, from a volume perspective. In fact, I'll have to go check my data, but at least since we've been running the ETH numbers on this show, this is certainly the most volume we've seen out here. 743,000 contracts going up on Deribit. That was actually on the 16th, listener. So it wasn't on the merge day. It was kind of the post-merge, I guess, palooza, you could call it out there, where that was really where we saw the paper. Greg, was that pretty much the busiest ETH options day we've seen, the day after the merge?
It's definitely a super busy day for sure. I'm not sure if it's exactly the busiest ever, but I'd have to double check that. But that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's pretty close here. Again, since we've been running the numbers, it's up there. I'm hard pressed to think of another 700,000+ day out. I'll have to go scrolling through the archives myself. But either way, listeners, a lot of paper going up out there, which is, again, not entirely surprising. It was kind of the day a lot of people had been waiting for. Let's get out to the OI and see what's lighting it up out there. What are these size positions in this new post-merge ETH universe? Let's find out. Number 5, it is the 5,000 strike sneaking in there now. 194,000 contracts open. That is a newcomer to our top 5 this week. So we're getting up there again. 5,000 strike. Interesting. Number 4, right back down to the 2,500 strike. 269,000 contracts open there. That's up about 10,000 from where it was this time last week. Number 3, splitting the uprights there. 3,500 strike. 352,000 contracts open. That's also down 10. So a little bit of evolution here in our size positions. Number 2, we have the 4,000 strike. 409,000 contracts open. It's up about 4,000. And once again, holding down the top spot, it has been the number 1 for quite some time. It is the 3,000 strike. 495,000 contracts open. We were at about 500,000 last week, so that's actually down 5,000 from this time last week, which makes some sense. Folks were piling into new positioning going into the merge and taking it off post-merge out there. But still, fascinating stuff. Like we said, this 3,000 strike has been something interesting to watch, particularly in December, and it'll be fascinating to see how long that position can persist out there. Of course, Greg, since the launch, and in fact, during all this merge madness last week, we also had the folks over there at CME finally getting into the big ETH fray and launching options on their big ETH contracts. I know you've been starting to pay more attention to the CME offering out there. Have you had a chance to check out the big ETH options or the micro stuff? And intriguing timing, certainly, for them to launch it the exact week of the ETH merge, Greg.
Yeah, that's super exciting. That's definitely something I'm hoping we get some volume around. And then what I think would be great for sort of the retail audience is a BITO-like product for ETH. Because if I look at sort of TradFi optionality, the CME options directly are still a little bit wide, but the BITO options are pretty decent. And actually, if I look at the open interest in BITO, it's about 20% of the open interest of Deribit. And so I think sort of seeing optionality on Ethereum gets us one step closer towards an Ethereum-like BITO ETF. And then we can see some nice equity optionality as well.
Yeah, that was my takeaway as well. We just had Tim McCourt from CME on our TWIFO program last week. He's, of course, the guy who oversees all of this crypto stuff over there at CME, listeners. So if you want to hear more about the launch and why they decided to go the way they did, check out that episode last week. I've said before on this show, you guys, if you're listening to Crypto Rundown, you should be checking out TWIFO at the very least, because there's a lot of crypto content there, as well as, of course, the Options Bootcamp and Options Playbook radio shows, because a lot of you are relative newcomers to the world of options. So if any of these terms we're throwing around here on the show today sound a little bit confusing, make sure you're checking out Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook radio. That was kind of the read I got from Tim as well, Greg. Obviously, he can't say it on the show, but they're hoping for some sort of, I guess you can call it etho. Let's call it an etho type product to come rolling along to do what BITO has done on that space, bring it to securities accounts. So a lot of the traditional equity options can now trade options on ETH, and also just drive up the volume numbers. So I had the same thought when they were talking about launching Ether options on the big contracts, is that we're probably heading for a world where we have some sort of Ether-O, perhaps, Ether-O product out there. So interesting to see. Obviously, the ETH options just launched, so we don't even have really the data on them yet. They're still starting to percolate through our system over there. Micro ETH options, though, had a bit of an interesting week last week, about nearly 15,000 contracts on the tape. Kind of light today, only 354 contracts on the tape today. So not a lot of action on the micro ETH front yet, but intriguing stuff out there. That product, and I mentioned this to Tim last week as well, that product tends to go in fits and starts, where a couple of days of nothing, and then all of a sudden 10,000 contracts are going up at a clip. It's a very bizarre staccato product. So a lot of that 14,400 contracts going up last week, most of it had, I think, traded on Wednesday. So just a very, very bizarre product to watch trading right now. And speaking of bizarre, Greg, you are to blame for adding this next product into our rotation out there, because of course you guys started adding more Solana data over there at GVol. So it's because of you, Greg, that we have to add Solana options into our rundown. So thanks a lot for a whole bunch more work, sir. Our producers, thank you.
Love it.
Well, let's dive into it then, because obviously Solana, the latest addition to our crypto rundown here. You've been following Solana for quite a while out here in the options front, Mr. Greg. What are your thoughts on all things Solana, what you're seeing out there, and perhaps how it compares and contrasts to all things Bitcoin and Ether?
Yeah, well, I would say Solana's been kind of a disappointment from my expectations. So we're seeing not a lot of open interest to the extent that I would expect. And then even if I'm looking at sort of like block trades being done on Paradigm and settled on Deribit, not a lot of block trade activity, comparatively speaking. We're not seeing a lot of realized vol. So for example, like in the past week, Ethereum moved, call it 23% or whatever. And Solana basically was between $31 and $34, call it 10%. So for sort of an altcoin, it's a little bit muted. And then lastly, Solana chain itself is kind of hitting some snags lately and having downtime and things like that. So it's a little bit of a dud by my expectations. I thought Solana might be a legitimate competitor to Ethereum. Not looking like that right now. The adoption in the options market still slow to accumulate. So those two things combined, I would say, name of the game is still Ethereum for the time being.
It seems that way. Solana, of course, looking a little bit lighter this week than it did this time last week. We're at about 37.5 on our show this time last week. This week, it maintains stubbornly north of that 30 handle, about a 32.70. So it's actually up a little bit today when everything else was pretty much red on the day. Solana getting a little bit of a lift. So that puts it down, not quite 5 handles, about 480 or so from where it was this time last week. Let's get on out to the vol. And again, you guys, if you're playing along with the G-Vol, you guys can now find all things Solana out there as well, which has been a requested thing from a lot of you to start talking Solana more on the show. So glad we can make it into the rotation. I joke about the extra work. We do it for you folks because we love you folks out there. And coming into showtime, Solana vol, like a lot of the major crypto, is pretty much down. So we were at about a 102 on our last show and about a 93 3/4 on the start of today's show. So obviously down a wee bit skew-wise, similar to ETH. It was about almost a -2 on our last show, about -1.8. Coming into the start of today's show, a little over 4, about -4.35 out there. So like Bitcoin and ETH before it, so looking a little bit more negative from an overall skew perspective, and the vol continuing to come in. Intriguingly, we saw a little bit of evolution out there on the OI front. The calls coming in dramatically, which is interesting. 279,000 contracts open on the call front. That's down a whopping 106,000 from this time last week. And the puts ticking up. The puts are now 507,000 puts open. It's up 107,000. So Solana, a big difference there from ETH and from Bitcoin, which Bitcoin is roughly 2-to-1 calls over puts. ETH is roughly 4-to-1 calls over puts. We're looking almost 2-to-1 in the other direction here for Solana, puts over calls, which is kind of interesting and does make it stand out a little bit from the other big crypto options out there. In terms of top positions, let's break it down out here, listeners. A bit of evolution this week as well. Number 5, we have the 34 strikes. Remember I said we're at about a 32.70 or so right now, listeners. The 34 strike, we have about 45,000 contracts open. That's down about 1,000 contracts from this time last week. Number 4, we have the 30 strike. It has about 55,000 contracts open. That's down about 10,000 from this time last week. Number 3, the 24 strike, 75,000 contracts open there. And then number 2, that's a newcomer, I do believe. Number 2, we have the 20 strike that has 82,000 contracts open. That's down about 8,000 contracts. And then the number 1 spot is the 28 strike. So that's interesting. Far out of the money put or an in the money call strike, depending on how you look at it. 105,000 contracts open there. That's up 62,000. I do believe, given the OI, what we're seeing out there, that the lion's share of that paper is certainly on the put front out there. So a lot of action on the 28 put strike out there. And in terms of action, a little bit less action on the tape this past week than we saw the week before. 110,000 contracts. That was the most active trading day. That compares to 145,000 that we saw a week ago on the 6th. So the 19th was the most active day, which is, of course, today. So intriguing stuff. Obviously, we don't have the final numbers for today, so maybe we'll catch up, but a little bit lighter out there this week. Before I get into some of the rest of the altcoin, Greg, I know you're always looking at the broad spectrum of crypto assets out there. Any other interesting altcoin or developments catching your eye you want to share with our listeners, sir?
Yeah, as far as altcoins, not really, but as far as development, I do think there's something interesting in the DeFi space. So this is a new DeFi options protocol. They just launched their Avalon, which is their latest release, back in June. This project is called Lyra, Lyra, the DeFi options AMM protocol, which allows you to, as a taker, sell to open as well as buy to open options. And the maker side is an automated market maker. But this is the reason I like it so much. That's actually a very intelligent options automated market maker. So Delta hedges, and it incorporates Vega pricing. So if the market maker is getting too long options or too long Vega or too short Vega, as traders trade against it in the same direction, there's a bit of an increase in fees. So people who are locking money into the AMM as liquidity providers have actually been making a decent amount of money without any sort of like liquidity incentive. So from both the liquidity providers' perspective, it's been a really good yield generating tool. And then from the option taker perspective, it's a really smooth experience. So the options that you can trade are really clean, well-priced curves, and a really kind of a seamless experience. So we've actually started incorporating their data into the GVol suite, and there's a decent amount of notional volume being traded there, and some good option prices, some good trades, and you could trade ETH options as well as wrap BTC options, and it's all done on Optimism, so the fees are really cheap and settlement's very quick. So it's something I'm really excited about. I think this is a great DeFi options AMM model. It's the first AMM model to be sort of successful and smart.
Interesting. Fascinating stuff. Don't see a lot of those. And it's a win-win. So we certainly like those here on the show. Let's get out to some of the other altcoin that are lighting up our tape. I mentioned good old Ripple earlier in the show. Maybe, how long have we been saying this now? So don't get your hopes up. And maybe we will see some sort of resolution to this thing sometime in the near future. XRP ticking up over the past week. So maybe they're seeing that out there. It was about 35.5 cents last week, 37.6, up a little over 2 cents on the week. Not a huge move, but that is at least something. Good old Dogecoin. Last show, 6.3 cents this week, 5.7. So down almost 6 cents on the week. Litecoin, 61.20 last week, 51.40 this week, down about 9.80 on the week. So rough week for Litecoin. Cardano, same deal, 50.4 last week, 44.6 cents this week. So down, about almost 6 cents here on the week. Polkadot, 7.73 last show, 6.29, taking a beating down there, off about 140 on the week. And all of our Shiba friends out there, no Shiba Lambos, I'm sorry, this week. After all that talk about Shiba whales and new positioning, we are down about 0.000002 on the week. Before we get out of here, then, let's get some of your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crypto Questions, a portion of the show where you folks take the reins with your questions from all across the world of crypto. Let's start here with Cole. Cole wants to know, how do you think the ETH merge and the end of ETH mining will impact the options market? Yeah, that is a big development. We didn't really touch on it too much earlier. That's obviously a big outcome of the merge, is that now there's effectively no more mining out there in the world of ETH. So intriguing stuff. We kind of talked about it being a bit of a non-event, Greg, but obviously it's still kind of recent in the rear view mirror. Maybe going forward a little bit, Cole wants to know, what do you think the impact of the ETH merge and the subsequent end of mining, you think that's going to have any lasting impact on the options market, sir?
Yeah, I do. I think it affects a really important input into the option market, which is basically the interest rates, or call it the cash and carry basis of the futures. Now that proof of work mining has switched to proof of stake, you don't really need to invest in mining infrastructure, and basically having holdings allows you to earn the yield. And so theoretically, if I can go ahead and earn a yield on my ETH at, call it 7 or 8% or whatever it ends up shaking out to be, on Coinbase, we can go ahead on Deribit, put up some collateral and sell some futures against my Coinbase holdings, and there's a little bit of collateral management there for sure. But that being said, the cash and carry basis should be negative, because basically the arbitrage free argument is that if I'm selling the future, well, my net premium or my net yield should be the risk-free rate minus some counterparty stuff. So I think long-term interest rates or cash and carry basis is going to be affected by this, which is going to be input into the options prices. And so I do think there's going to be something interesting there.
Yeah, taking all those miners out of the equation, that'll be interesting to see the impact. You're right. They were an interesting input into the equation and using. They needed to hedge and use a lot of the options at the end of the day. So maybe taking them out of the equation or changing that equation a little bit could have some interesting long-term ramifications that we have not seen yet. Let's get on out to this one from Nisto. Nisto, interesting handle. Nisto wants to know, are you noticing any interesting developments any interesting differences between Solana options and the other primary options markets in Ethereum and Bitcoin? Well, I just pointed out one of the most obvious and most glaring of them, Nisto, which is unlike ETH and Bitcoin, which are dramatically call heavy from an OI perspective, Solana is almost 2-to-1 towards the puts. So we have not seen, even in some of the heavy days when the skew got really negative, the OI was still predominantly in the calls in both ETH and Bitcoin. So Solana changing up the game a little bit there from that perspective. Anything else you want to mention here for our friend Nisto, Greg, in terms of differences you've noticed between Solana options and ETH and Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest thing I've noticed is sort of the lack of real block trade participation. I mean, we see a little bit of it, but it's really not to the same extent. And overall, the OI and volume numbers are pretty weak. They're taking a lot longer to adopt or gain adoption than I expected. So until then, I'm kind of just lukewarm on Solana.
We do all this work to add Solana to the show, and you're lukewarm on it, Greg. There we go. All right. Well, interesting stuff. Interesting stuff here. Music means, of course, we have come to an end here for the show this week. You know, part of it, I'm sure, Greg, too, is the fact that we're talking, obviously, about a $32 asset versus a still $1,300, or in the case of Bitcoin, north of $19,000. So the use case for options is a little bit different with one of these than the other two, right? I'm sure if we had Solana at a price point somewhere closer to the other two, the use case for block options would certainly be much more apparent. So I think there's something to do with the price action there as well, Greg. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I didn't think about it like that, but that makes sense.
We see that all the time with options on, say, $3 stocks or $5 stocks. You know, when the stock itself is something akin to an option, and obviously $32 is more expensive than that, but when compared to $1,300 or $19,000, it is a substantially cheaper asset. So folks can come to play in the underlying and not have any of the issues with timing and anything else that they would have if they were to, let's say, buy the options instead and the decay and do so for a much lower rate. So I'm sure if we had, you know, let's say some of the headier days of Solana behind us where we're north of 100, might be a little bit of a different story. Interesting stuff. I'm curious what you folks have to say. Are you guys starting to bite on Solana options? Is the underlying itself, is that low cost enough to satiate your Solana needs? I'm curious. Hit us up. Let us know. Before we go, Greg, you mentioned a lot of things you guys have cooking over there in the land of GVOL. If you want to leave our audience wanting more, you want to leave them with a few more hints, a few more teases, what they can expect coming down the pike from you guys, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, we have, fingers crossed, a big announcement coming out pretty soon. I don't want to quite leak it yet, but it will make the GVOL product suite a lot better. Where we'll have sort of TradFi data as well as fixed delivery mechanisms for our API and expanded future suite and expanded on-chain data as well. So we're pretty excited about kind of this development. So that's going to be coming out pretty soon. So we'll keep an eye open for that. And then otherwise, in the meantime, we have our newsletter that you can find at genesisvolatility.substack.com. We also have our YouTube channel with all sorts of cool content. You can just type in GVOL in your YouTube search bar. And then we have our Twitter at Genesis Vol, and then obviously our website, which is gvol.io.
I will say you guys are adding new coats of paints, new bells and whistles all the time. Every time I log into GVol, Greg, I'm finding something new that I want to play around with. So you guys have done a lot of cool stuff. I do love the new slogan, so much edge you'll cut yourself. that brought a smile to my face when you put that on the platform. So go over there, listen. Maybe wear some gloves, listeners, so you don't get cut. But check it out for yourselves. gvol.io is the place to go. I can hardly recommend their newsletter as well if you want to get their insights in between episodes and the infrequent appearances here on the show, and check them out over there on their newsletter. You can find it, of course, at all those outlets Greg just mentioned. That's going to do it for us here on the network today. Back again for all you pro folks tomorrow with a great pro Q&A with Carly Garner. She's always great to talk about all things futures, options, and positioning. She'll probably have some cool ladders or risk reversal, something fun in nat gas, something else to talk about. Of course, if you guys have questions about all that cool stuff, any futures options type trade or strategy or just what's going on in those markets, start getting them in now. It should be a popular pro Q&A. Then my producers reminded me we are going back live for boot camp this week over there to the mastermind again. So that should be fun. Dan's doing another mastermind, so he asked, and so we kindly obliged him to go do it live there. So we'll see if we can have the live stream directly from the event or not, or if it'll be live to tape like it was last. Probably the way it was last time, I have to imagine, given the connectivity situation over there at SIBO is a little bit dicey. So we're going to be doing it probably live to tape from another mastermind session over there at the SIBO, so that should be fun. And then Brian will be coming at you for OPR later. Then, of course, TWIFO. If you're not checking out TWIFO, you're listening to the Crypto Rundown, are you missing out on some cool crypto content? Also, some cool crypto analytics going on over there for all things CME, courtesy of our friends over there at QuickStrike and Bantic. So check that out. They have some good stuff going there as well. Friday, of course, vol views and options oddities. And we're back again next week, another episode of the Crypto Rundown. Stay safe out there, everybody.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.